Welcome in everyone to Kayfabe with Keaton. Another episode. I have such a great guest coming in here, Mr. Smooth, Johnny Kidd.
Good evening there, Keaton, and good evening to everybody watching and listening.
So Johnny Kidd, you've had such an illustrious career in the pro wrestling. Tell me about your beginnings in pro wrestling. How did you first get into pro wrestling?
It's a long story, really. I always was interested in wrestling, mainly watching Saturday afternoons on ITV, the World of Sport wrestling shows, and I thought, how could I start that? And it wasn't easy to get in those days, obviously. So I joined an amateur wrestling club. I sent away for a list of amateur wrestling clubs, and I got one back in my area. And I joined that club, which was at Ampthill in Bedfordshire, which is about 9 miles from where I live. And luckily enough, I passed my driving test, so I could drive myself to these Monday nights. We used to train there, but it was amateur wrestling, and I was there for 4 years. And I thought it was completely different to what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be the wrestling ring and the moves and the holds, but it was obviously groundwork on a mat, like the amateurs do for like the Olympic Games and Greco-Roman style wrestling. But it was interesting for me to learn some of that, obviously, and then I was lucky enough later on to contact a local promoter, the former European welterweight champion Ken Joyce, who lived about 30 miles from me in Rushden. I used to go and watch shows there, and he was the one who actually gave me my first opportunity to work on one of his shows. He contacted me one day and asked if I would go down to South London, meet him there, and he took me to a show, and I had my first pro paid bout for his promotion, which was Devereaux Promotions, on October the 21st, 1978. And I wrestled a guy called Tony Scarlo, who, believe it or not, is still around today. I actually saw Tony a week ago in London at one of our reunion dinners.
And what was it like being trained by the legendary Ken Joyce?
When you say trained, Keaton, by him, I wasn't actually trained. There was no such training really in those days. The only time we actually got in a wrestling ring was when we appeared on the show of the evening. You know, you turn up at a hall and the ring was already up. You couldn't get into the ring and practice. We just didn't do that. We sort of like, you wrestled your opponent, and I suppose if we wrestled that opponent maybe twice or three times over a course of 3 or 4 weeks, that's how you picked up the different holds and the different throws and the different moves. But Ken was legendary, really. Ken was a very good wrestler. He didn't actually train me, but I wrestled him a lot. And obviously, I got to know his style. He knew mine. And when we went on, we was quite competent at wrestling each other. And I say, I was lucky enough with Ken as well to do his last television match before he retired. The last TV match that was. He carried on wrestling after that. But I was quite proud to do that and wrestle him. And that was at Lincoln in 1982, I believe.
We've got a question coming in here from Steve
Yep.
Savage, who asks, "What's the wrestlers' reunion like?"
I know Steve, if it's Steve from Northern Ireland there. Hello, Steve. Good to see that you're okay, my friend. The Wrestlers Reunion, there's two or three held in this country. You know, there's one in Leeds that's held twice a year, April and October. There's one in Blackpool that's held in June that I haven't attended yet. There's one in Scotland that's held every year in September, which I've been to twice. And there's the one that used to be down in Kent, obviously is not going anymore due to the passing of the guy who run the pub there, Wayne Bridges, and his wife Sarah Bridges. They used to run that one. But there's another one now. It's a wrestling dinner that's run by the LDN director and promoter Sanjay Bagga, and that is a dinner where we get together in a hall in Watford in Hertfordshire, and that's once a year in August. We've had two there now, and he does try to mix a new breed of wrestler with some of the old faces that are still around, and it's very enjoyable Sunday afternoon there with them.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. What's it like to mix different styles? I know you're a British wrestler, but what's it like to mix different styles and see the newer style of American style when you're working with LDN?
I'm quite lucky actually because obviously, for me, a lot of the guys will try to adapt to the style I do because I could not do half that stuff they do now, Keaton. You know, in my day, it was all holds and counter holds, escapes, technical moves. But these days, they do a lot more. They do a lot more high flying stuff. Most promotions do that now. And obviously, I'm very lucky that I can't do that. But a lot of the guys do like to learn some of this stuff. And there is competent wrestlers about now that can adapt to that style as well. So for me, I've carried on through that British style wrestling all through my career. Really, I didn't have to switch. I would be too old to try and do that stuff now.
And then we've got another question coming in here from Carrickpool. Johnny, do you still train? You're are still in great shape?
Yeah, I still train, believe it or not. I go to the gym here, local gym that I have here. Nothing wrestling related. It's just cardio fitness and a little bit of weights. I don't do much at my age now, but I do go there 3 times a week. I was there this morning. I do like to see the boys when I go to the shows. And if there's a chance sometimes where I could step into the ring and just go through a few moves or just something like that, put a few holds on that they haven't seen, I would do it. But yes, I still train. But I don't go mad with training, but I do say I do like the gym and I do go for my cardio fitness for myself at least 3 times a week.
And how did you get involved with the Crabtree family into the world of sport?
Again, yes, I after that first job with Ken Joyce, which I did in 1978, when I was leaving the hall at Salisbury, I was walking out with Ken, and obviously he took me down from South London. And on the way back, he said to me, Max Crabtree of Joint Promotions has given you a couple of jobs here. And they were both in November. The first one was at Hanley, which was a regular established hall that used to run weekly in those days. And then the following Thursday at Digbeth in Birmingham, which again was every Thursday because they had enough shows or enough wrestlers to actually work that every week. And they got good crowds in there. Um, I never actually met Max Crabtree until April '79 when I did a show at Bristol, the Colston Hall. And that was the first time I met Max. Max didn't usually go to the halls, only big shows or television shows. But he'd heard about me, obviously. And when I was there that night, he said he was going to watch me and see what the matches were like. I was on with a guy called Jeff Kay, who ended up being a good referee. And from there, I was lucky. I just stayed with Joint Promotions, and I was only a part-time wrestler, mine, because I had a full-time job that I carried on all through my wrestling days. I worked for a car company, Vauxhall Motors, or General Motors, as they're known in the States, and I worked there for 40 years, and I combined the two. I could quite easily work during the day and wrestle at night, and that's what I did.
And then we've got another comment coming in here from Scenic Spots, who
Yeah,
says, I used to love sitting with my dad at weekends watching you and Big Daddy and the guys. Thanks so much for the memories.
yeah, I mean, obviously, I was lucky again because after I'd wrestled a few times, as you know, Big Daddy was coming up then. He was the big star. Max turned him from virtually a heavyweight wrestler, and then he made him into this character of Big Daddy, and that really took off. Then we used to go to packed halls. You never went to a hall and said, "What's the house going to be like tonight?" Because if he was on or Haystacks was on, they were always packed houses. And I was lucky enough to tag with Big Daddy at least between 35 and 40 times. Never on television in England, but we did two after the television shows finished in England. We did two for Scottish television that were only shown on the Grampian area or Scottish TV. And I was tagging with him on both occasions there in Aberdeen in 1991. But it was great. You know, I used to like going on those tags because the opposition, you got some good opposition wrestlers against you. Drew McDonald, Wrestling Rasputin, Haystacks, of course. Sid Cooper was always involved, and it was good. And I still enjoyed those matches, I must say, with Big Daddy because you knew there was going to be a good crowd, and you knew that the atmosphere and everything was always fantastic when him or Haystacks were around. For me, anyway.
And a lot of the British wrestlers say they didn't really like Big Daddy, that he kind of ruined British wrestling. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it did. I mean, a lot of people say that, and I mean, you speak as you find, don't you? Like, you know, like people that probably don't like me, and there's some that do. But then, as you say, you speak as you find. I personally never had any problem with Big Daddy. As I say, every time I wrestled with him, it was always fair to me. Max was always fair to me as well. Again, I was only a part-time wrestler, so I wasn't around these guys 7 nights a week like some of the full-timers were. Maybe Big Daddy, as I say, towards the end, it was getting a little bit more predictable with the matches and what was going to happen and what they were, you know, the opponents were going to be. But in the day, he put bums on seats. You know, when his name was on a poster, you knew that was going to be a crowd, and he did, and he held that crowd for a long, long time.
And I'm also a big fan of, the technical world of sport wrestling. What was it like in the golden era of British wrestling?
Well, I came in a bit behind all of that. I mean, the technical area of the guys when I came in were obviously people like Johnny Saint, who was the 10-time world lightweight champion. Stevie Gray was another good wrestler. There was lots of good wrestlers. Mal Sanders came in a year before me. Zoltan Bosic was another good technical wrestler. He could be a villain as well. But for me, Johnny Saint was probably up there. Jimmy Breaks as well. John, I was lucky enough to wrestle John on my third television show at Wembley, and that was really good for me because John was just so good at what he did. It was effortless. If you watch some of his matches, there seemed to be no struggling to put holds on, escaping holds. He was very technically minded, and he did all that sort of stuff in no days that a good technical wrestler could do. I mean, you're talking of those weights in technical wrestlers. There were heavyweight technical wrestlers as well. Super Destroyer Pete Roberts was one. Keith Hayward was a good amateur and also a good technical wrestler. Iron Fist Clive Myers, another welterweight who was the arm wrestling champion as well, another good wrestler. There was a lot of these guys that could do the job and do it very well.
And can you remember your first time getting an opportunity for a championship?
I can't remember when it would have been, but I did wrestle Steve Gray a few times for the British Lightweight Championship. I wrestled Johnny Saint for the World Title Championship, Danny Boy Collins for the Welterweight Championship. Never successful in any of them, I will say that. I never held a championship belt, but I did get put in with these guys. Jimmy Ocean, when he was the British Lightweight Champion, I know I wrestled him for the title. I think that was at Croydon. Jimmy Breaks for his European Lightweight title again at Croydon. But I say I got my fair share of championship matches, but I was never successful against any of those guys.
And what was it like working with your one of your idols in wrestling, Mick McManus?
Well, it's funny because a lot of people ask me that, and I mean, when I started wrestling, Keaton, the first thing I wanted to do was wrestle. He was my hero, Mick McManus. He was the guy that I looked at and thought, yeah, that was what wrestling was all about. Mick for me was the man. I wanted to wrestle at the Royal Albert Hall because in the day that was the best venue in the land to wrestle in, especially when it was full. I must be honest and say when I wrestled there, it was only probably half full because the houses had dropped down. And to wrestle on television. And I was lucky enough to do all those three things. And I actually wrestled Mick McManus on television at Southport in 1982. So I'm pretty pleased with that. But Mick was great. I mean, I enjoyed working with Mick. I probably did about 8 or 9 matches with Mick, and I say that television match, and I've still got it. I had it transferred from the old VHS video to DVD, and I've still got it now, and I still look at it from time to time because to me, yeah, Mick was the man. He was the best.
And I understand that you were in a tag team with Robbie Brookside called the Young Ones. What was Robbie Brookside like as a tag team partner?
It's funny. Robbie was really good. I mean, I enjoyed it. I was in Germany once with WXW, and Robbie Brookside was my partner. We wrestled there. I can't think who we were. I think we was on probably with Emil Satoshi and somebody else. I can't remember. Some time ago. And Robbie had his own ring music at the time, and he went out first, or they went in first, and we had individual music when we went out. And Robbie Brookside said to me, "Listen to this music when I go out." It was unbelievable. The crowd were all around the ring. I think it was probably the song was called "Fly," I think, something like that. But the crowd were berserk. But Robbie was such a good guy, and I like working with Robbie. I wrestled him as well. We always had good matches, and I think it was probably due to one of the matches I had with Robbie Brookside at Wigan that the promoters there at WXW saw the match and they invited me to come over to Germany and do my first match for WXW. And I was on with a guy called, you know him probably as Cesaro or Claudio
Yeah, Claudio
Castagnoli.
Castagnoli.
Yeah, I got a chance to wrestle Claudio before he went to the WWE. Um, they sent him off as their champion. He'd got a green card and they wanted to send him off. And I wrestled Claudio. And luckily enough, I wrestled him again when they did one of their 16 carat shows a few years later. I was in a tournament there and I was on with Claudio again. Such a lovely guy. And I wasn't sure what to expect, but Claudio is one of the best as well. I always enjoyed the matches with him.
And when you talk about doing styles, with Cesaro, aka Claudio Castagnoli, that's two different styles there. And they're a really surprising match that I saw. Johnny Kidd, who's a really good technical wrestler, faced off against Doink the Clown. What was it like facing Doink the Clown?
Could you facing who again?
Doink the Clown.
Dunk the Clown.
Yeah.
Is that the American Dunk the Clown?
Yeah,
No, I never wrestled him, so that fact's not me. It wasn't me that wrestled him. I must be honest. I've never wrestled. The only American guys I wrestled, I can tell you, was Mike Quackenbush, obviously. Um, uh, Not Claudio. There's another guy, Matt Striker, and a guy called Jason Carrion. I remember wrestling Jason when he was over for LDN, but I never wrestled Doink the Clown. I'm sorry.
it's okay. I thought I read it somewhere. What Wrestling Insider asked, did you ever do TLC matches?
No, again, for me, I probably did a couple of cage matches. I remember doing one again many, many years ago, but it was nothing to what you see these days. It was just a case of like we were in the cage, and I think you just virtually had to wrestle in the cage and touch the four corners before you could climb out or get out. It was nothing that hardcore. Never done a TLC match, I must be honest. No, although I've been hit by a chair by a wrestler many years ago, but never been really involved in what you call a match that was like that.
TZ's videos asked, did you guys party after the shows?
No, because for me, someone like me, I had a full time job, and we were lucky in those days. You could go to the venue. I used to drive myself to wherever it be, and at the end of the show, if I was on, just say first with say, I don't know, Claudio Castagnoli, for instance. If I was on with him, and we'd gone our separate ways. We'd go on first, you'd be in the shower after, you get paid, and you would go home. So there was none of this really hanging around because most guys, a lot of the shows, we were a long way from home, and people just wanted to get home. They didn't want to stay around for like 2 or 3 hours after and go out and drinking and whatever. And a lot of the guys drive, so they couldn't drink anyway. Unless you were staying over, maybe you would in a hotel or something like that because you was down for a show the next day somewhere with a promotion, you might do that. But for me, I always like to go home. So very rarely there was any of that. No.
What's your most favorite memory of in pro wrestling?
Well, I had quite a few. Obviously, the McManus one on the television was always good for me. Wrestling Mike Quackenbush because it was Mike who took me to America in 2011. Originally, he wanted us to go over for the King of Trios. He wanted myself, Johnny Saint, who was the world lightweight champion, and Steve Gray, who was the British lightweight champion. But Steve was injured and he couldn't make it. So Mike said, "There's no point in bringing two of you over for a King of Trios. I need three." So he tried to get another World of Sport guy, but there was nobody really around or available. So later on, Mike, true to his word, said he'll bring me and Johnny Saint over at another time, and he did. And 2011, we went over there and we did our sort of match for the audience there in Philadelphia. And then the next night, we did a tag match with myself and Colt Cabana against Mike Quackenbush and Johnny Saint. And it was well received by the fans. And then in 2017, Mike Quackenbush introduced a tournament called the Johnny Kidd Memorial or something like not memorial, but it was Johnny Kidd Invitational Tournament, and he had a few guys there doing technical style wrestling, and I went over there to present the winner with the trophy. And one of the English guys came with me who was actually wrestling was James Mason. He was on that show as well. So it's always good to wrestle. Mike is actually really good with technical stuff as well. He does simple things, and you think, how did he do that? And it was so simple. And it's always a pleasure. And I'm still in contact with Mike. And if Mike's listening, I don't know if he is, I've just sent him a Christmas card like I do every year.
And a thing that British wrestlers regularly say is that they don't like American wrestling and that it's not proper wrestling. What's your opinion on that?
Well, you've got to remember things have moved on. When I started in 1978, that was here and now, wasn't it? But now you have to move forward with the times, and obviously that's how it came. American wrestling was always around, even when I started, but it wasn't shown so much. So obviously the audiences didn't see what they see today. So yeah, I mean, things move ahead. Nothing stays the same forever. Nothing lasts forever. So as things evolve, that's how wrestling has gone, and that's what crowds these days come to see. If you put a show on with technical wrestling, the whole card, I think people wouldn't want to see that anymore. One match you get away with, maybe a bit, to lighten the show down or to bring it down before you have a main event go on. But the crowds now have been brought up onto this sort of stuff, and they go to see that sort of stuff you know for me, it's obviously not my thing, but there again, that's what people pay their money to see, and promoters are doing okay. And while that's the shows that people want to see, promoters will keep doing that. Obviously, I don't think there's the market now for the technical stuff to come back completely. And there again, you would need the wrestlers to be able to be competent enough to do that sort of style, and carry that off night after night.
What's your favorite match that you've ever had?
The favourite match I ever had. Ooh, well, again, it keeps harboring back to Mick, doesn't it? I mean, the matches I had with Mick, Jimmy Breaks, Blondie Barrett. I wrestled the Rock and Roll Express, Bob Barrett, many, many times. Tag matches with Pat Roach, with Haystacks. I've tagged with him. I've been against him. The matches against Kendo Nagasaki, obviously, were always matches that were always full of controversy, shall we say. There's not one that stands out because there've been so many. The lighter weight guys, Zoltan Bosick, Mal Sanders, always had a good match with Jimmy Brake, Stevie Gray. All of these guys are always good for me. Even now, James Mason, just recently, I've wrestled James Mason a few times over the last year, and James is so good at what he does. And in my opinion, James Mason is the best in the UK at the moment for wrestling. He can do American style. He can do anything, James. He started at a young age of 14. And I've known James over 30 years since when he started. And, to see what that guy's achieved, he's a good hard worker as well, never complains and gets on with it. And he'll go on with anybody. He could wrestle anybody. He could go on with you, Keaton, and make you look good, I'm telling you.
And Scenic Spots asked another question. Did you ever wrestle in Canada?
No, I never did. I wrestled in the States. I wrestled in Malta. I wrestled in Germany, Holland, obviously all over England, Scotland. Not many times in Northern Ireland, probably only about three or four. Wales, obviously, I wrestled, and Romania. I went to Romania to do a show a couple of years ago. There was a wrestler called Future Shock Tom Fulton, who's a Scottish school teacher, but he lives in Romania. He runs a training school and his own promotion out there. And he very kindly invited me over. We did a training school and I wrestled him in Romania. But no, I've never been to Canada.
Dara Whitehead, I think I know the answer to this one, but Dara Whitehead asks, who was the hardest man inside and outside the ring?
Ooh, that I wrestled or that I know of.
I think he just means at the time
Who's
British wrestling.
Um, okay, well, like a lot of stories relate to Les Kellett, don't they? I mean, Les Kellett was
Yeah.
known to be a very, very hard man. You wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of him. But then again, one day he could come and be nice as pie to you, and the next day he would ignore you completely. I personally never met Les Kellett. I was only a punter when I used to watch him wrestle, so I've never met him, so I can't answer that. There was quite a few hard men. They all talk about Billy Robinson, Burt Azarati many, many years ago. And again, I never met these guys, so I don't know, but they had the reputation of being hard men. But if you're looking back to my day, I'd say Billy Robinson, but more so Kellett, because Kellett was nearer to my time when I came in, I think. And Billy Robinson then had already gone to the States.
And Billy Robinson's trained so many wrestlers. Who do you think? Who do you think was his most successful student?
Well, I think he trained quite a few, didn't he? I think he trained Marty Jones. I think he did a bit of work with Marty. He did a lot with Johnny Saint. I think he did some stuff with John. I don't know, but I mean, I know that when Billy Robinson came back to this country from America and he was on a television show here in England, they were trying to match him with one of the English heavyweights. And I know a lot of the British heavyweights didn't want to go on with him because they thought they're not going to enjoy this at all. And Billy was going to be very hard with them. And one guy who did step in had a good amateur wrestling and wrestling account for himself was Lee Bronson, the Ballum heavyweight. He took on Billy Rob. He went on, and it wasn't a bad match. And that match is on YouTube if anyone cares to look at it. Billy Robinson against Lee Bronson. Obviously, Billy went over, won the match, but he did. He gave a fair account of himself, and I think Lee Bronson did it because nobody else fancied going on with him. And Lee Bronson wouldn't have been that old at the time.
What was your emotions when World of Sport came to an end?
We It was strange, really, because I was lucky again to be on the very last show that they did, which was recorded from Rickmansworth in 1988, November 1988. It had been going downhill, I suppose, a little while, and I think what it was, we were still getting good crowds, but they had a new director or producer of London Weekend Television called Greg Dyke. And Greg Dyke looked at that and he thought it was too old hat for what they wanted to promote on television now. They thought it was way back past its best. So he decided to scrap it. So it was sad, really, that it came off because all those guys on Watersport, they were household names. You know, you knew these guys, people knew these guys. Where unfortunately, all the guys that came in after that, they weren't really well known. Television's the shop window, isn't it? Once you're seen on television, if a television, a match is recorded on television in a hall, the people then in the hall see it, but also the millions see it, on the television after, and that's how you're recognised in a way. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the guys today work very hard and they're not getting the recognition because of no shop window, no television, national television, that is.
Wrestling Insider asks, Johnny, in your opinion, who is the biggest wrestling star in Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales who wrestled in the golden era that is still around today?
Well, James Mason, obviously, I still know James, and he's still good what he does. Northern Ireland, I can't really say because I don't know many of the guys over there. Steve Savage, I do know because he's come over for LDN Wrestling. I know Nathan Hoy, who promotes shows in Northern Ireland,
Yeah,
obviously.
NIPW.
Scotland, there's obviously some good guys up there. I did wrestle a guy that went over to the WWE, and that was Noam Dar, and I guess Noam is still over there. And Wales, again, I've not really met a great deal of people from Wales, but as I say, I would say now James Mason is at the top of the tree, really, for me. If someone said to me, "Can you do a match with James Mason tomorrow?" I could do it. Not that I'm going to do it, but I could do it because James, I know, is so technically minded, and it's such an easy match if you wrestle someone like James. So, again, from my day, the World of Sport days, there's hardly anybody left now. All those big names have virtually finished.
Did you ever get asked for autographs or photos after the show?
Not so much photos, but autographs, because in those days, obviously, the cameras were just those cameras where you took a shot and then you have to take all the film in to get it developed. There was no digital stuff really around, like there was no mobile phones or anything like that. But autographs for us, yes, because when we used to leave a hall, there was always people outside the dressing room, or you go in the bar, maybe have a drink, or you leave into the car park, someone would be outside the door and say, "Could you sign this?" And that's what we did. So yes, I think most of the guys, and even now, obviously, as you know, with all the backstage passes, the audience get to meet all the wrestlers on the show, whereas in our day, they wouldn't get to meet all of us. They might see one or two and, "Can I have your autograph? Can I have your autograph?" So yes, we did get asked, Keaton. Yeah.
And TZS videos asked a very good question. Is there a difference between wrestling on a live pay-per-view or taping for TV?
I can't answer for pay per view because I don't really understand or know what that entails. For our television, when we used to televise or World of Sport televised shows, it was always a six match program. They recorded the whole thing, and obviously there was more lights about because it was all recorded. The television cameras, the lights. The ring was quite warm in them days when the television. They used to have like two or three cameras recording the matches, and then they would put them in the can, as they say, and then they used to show them on World of Sport, like on the Saturday afternoons, or maybe keep three matches back and show it later on. I can't really answer that one, I'm afraid, because that's more. I've heard a lot of pay per view, obviously, where people have to pay to see the shows, but in our day, you didn't. People just turned on the television on the Saturday afternoon, and our stuff would be on there, wouldn't
And who's the wrestler that's had the best in-ring chemistry with?
it? Well, the Rock and Roll Express, Blondie Barrett. I mean, I know him. Obviously, I knew him when I started in '74, so we've been long-term acquaintances and friends. I've known Bob all those years. Most of the guys never had a problem with any of the guys. Mal Sanders is always good. Steve Gray, again, the guys that I mentioned to you earlier on. Sadly, Jimmy Breaks is no longer with us, but Jimmy was good. Johnny Saint was good. So never had a problem with any of them, and I can't say that one of them stuck out because, I say, when you were on with these guys, There was no problem whatsoever.
And what is your relationship like with Mike Quackenbush?
Well, Michael, like I said to you, it was Mike who took me over to America in 2011, the first time. Yes, Mike came over to England last year. I was lucky enough because I was asked to do this show for Arcadian Wrestling in the Northeast. And they said they were going to try and get Mike Quackenbush to come over. And would I go on with him? And it all came off, and I did go on with Mike again. And he did a 2 day training school up there as well. And it's always good to see Mike because we get together when we can. And obviously, we're 3,000 miles apart, but when I see Mike over here in England, it's always good to catch up and chat what he's doing. When he was running Shikara, as you know, he still trains himself. I believe he has a couple of other trainers with him now, but he still gets in the ring himself to do certain training seminars. Not only for his own company, I believe he's travelled as well. He's been to different places, and I know he was at the Performance Center some years ago, the WWE. He was down in Florida for 6 months showing him his stuff, but I do believe that he didn't want to leave Shikara even if they approached him to come down full time. I think he still was loyal to Shikara and he wanted to stay with them because he had a good base there. So it's always good to see Mike. And as I say, we exchange Christmas cards. Again, it's been over a year since I've seen him now, but we do have email from time to time. He'll mention something and I'll comment on what's going on. So he follows the scene over in the UK pretty much as well. So he does know what's happening. But yeah, Mike, it's always good to see Mike. He's got a good head on him. He talks a good match as well, and he can talk. Mike could come on to your show and he'll explain things, dead simple. And Mike's a great guy. I'm pleased that our paths crossed. First met him in 2004, as I say, and then again 2007 when he brought us over, myself and Johnny Saint, 2011. And then only a couple of years ago, so back end of last year, I think it was, or mid of last year, when he came over to Newcastle and we did those shows for Arcadian.
And as you say there, you're really close friends with Mike Quackenbush. Uh, who was your closest friend in wrestling, do you think?
Oof. Well, I mean, a lot of them are acquaintances, aren't they? I had friends at work when I worked. I class them as friends. And the wrestling guys, I mean, obviously I speak to from time to time. When we have those gatherings, it's always good to see Steve Gray, Mal Sanders, and we chat quite a lot. I saw Steve Gray. I actually spoke to Steve Gray yesterday, but he wasn't around to meet up. James Mason, I speak to a lot. Most of them, those sort of guys I do keep in contact with. And when we have the reunions, you see them all. You see the guys there that you haven't seen for a long time and you're not likely to see apart from these reunions, because I say sometimes they can attend, sometimes they can't attend. We're all getting older now. And sometimes it's just impossible for some of the guys to travel. So but yeah, I mean, as you say, I do try to keep in touch with who I can, and at least I speak to those maybe once every couple of weeks or so. Mel Sanders, Stevie Gray, Sanjay Bagga of LDM Promotions. I speak to him quite often as well because I've done a lot of refereeing work for him, and I will continue to do that. And I always like working with those guys that he has on his shows because he has some good guys there as well.
Scenic spots. Did you ever see anyone getting attacked by old ladies with their handbags for being such a body?
It's funny you say that. No, I mean that did happen, but you used to get that in certain halls. You'd always know that people would be at the front, and you'd know that this woman would be here, and she would like come up and hit you with a bag. The trouble is, she wasn't very particular who she hit. She'd come up and she might hit the good guy, and then the next minute she might swing the bag and hit the bad guy and things like that. But no, I didn't see that very often. But in the early days before my time, I heard stories about people being hit with like bags. And Kendo reported once that someone hit him with a bag and it had a brick inside it. And then Adrian Street was hit by something. And I know that Klondike Kate was stabbed in the backside with a foot and mouth injection, so she tells us. And then other people were hit with like a knitting needle, things like that, But thankfully, that has not happened to me. You get some crowds that were quite rowdy in the halls, like Norwich and Kings Lynn were always known for being a bit tasty, sort of like for the wrestlers. You know, you had to be careful because the crowds got a bit aggressive there. But that was down to us that what we did was probably making them that way. You know, so you had to be careful with yourself there.
And you always hear that from the world of sport era, but you don't really hear about it now because obviously things have changed. You know, Dave Finlay, who wrestled in them days, told me he got a cigarette up his back.
Yeah, more than likely, Dave. I mean, I know Dave. I was lucky enough again to wrestle him for WXW in Germany. And that was the last time I saw Dave. He was over from the States. He was doing a little bit of a mini tour in Europe. And yes, Dave has. I've seen, Dave quite a few shows when he was here in England back in the day. Tremendous worker, Dave always was. Really top of his game. And when you saw a match, if you ever watched the matches he had with Marty Jones, they're fabulous matches. You know, there's one on there now on YouTube that a lot of people talk about, and they did about 8 or 9 rounds there, and it was a good storyline. The moves were fantastic with those, and I think they were ahead of their time, as well as Rollerball. Mark Rocco was well ahead of his time. Him and Marty Jones introduced that really, diving through the ropes and stuff like that. Never been seen on British television before, and Marty was one of the first to do that with Rocco. When the Dynamite Kid was over here and he came back, he did that stuff. As you know, Tommy Billington and the British Bulldog Davy Boy Smith, they were good workers as well, and they went on to better things in the States.
Yeah, and you didn't really see that in British wrestling at the time. One guy who actually jumped off the top rope of it was Kung Fu Eddie Hamill.
Yeah, I know Eddie. I mean, again, I haven't seen him because Eddie lives up in North Wales, and I haven't seen him for a while. I think I did a show in North Wales in Rill 3, 4 years ago, maybe, and Eddie was at the show. And we had a little chat there. Yes, Eddie was a tremendous worker as Kung Fu. Um, he was around, but he'd actually finished with joint promotions when I started. I started, as I say, in '78. Eddie was not on any show that I was on. So I think he probably went across to the opposition independent promoters. But yeah, Eddie was very good with what he did, spectacular stuff as well. And it gave a bit of interest to the show, a man like that doing kung fu moves, always something different. You have to be different in wrestling. We don't all want to be the same, and Eddie brought something different to the world of sport era, certainly.
He's such a nice guy as well. I interviewed him. He's a lovely man as well.
You've met him as well, have you? Yeah, Eddie. Yeah,
Yeah. Carrick Poole asks, "What
yeah.
is the one fundamental piece of learning you want wrestlers to take away from a seminar?"
Oh, well, there's two or three bits really. The first thing is take your time with what you do. We find a lot of days wrestlers these days rush things. They try to rush everything. There's always that. Take your time with what you're doing. Think of what you're doing. When you're putting your moves on and you're trying to escape from moves, you've got to think of your opponent as well. You've got to be safe with these guys, like they've got to be safe with you. So the fundamental thing is take your time and try and do things correctly without rushing through moves and making a complete mess of them. And again, don't try anything that you've seen him do or this guy do and think, yeah, I can do that, and you can't do it. There's things I see these guys do. I think I can't do that. And there's no point saying I can and then doing it and causing an injury to myself or an opponent. So you've got to be competent in what you do as well. But the main thing is I would take my time when I'm learning these moves and just watch and listen to what people are telling you.
What do you think's the worst injury you've ever had?
I broke my sternum, which is
Oh
breastbone.
no.
That was the worst injury I had. A wrestler fell on me. It was at Walthamstow in England. I was in a Big Daddy tag match, and one of the opponents fell off the corner post. He was going to come down on me. Must have fell awkwardly, and he landed on me, and I broke my sternum there. I didn't know till I got back to work. I felt it was a bit, every time I breathed in, I could feel it pulling on my chest. So I went to the surgery we had at work the next day, and they sent me to the hospital, and they confirmed it had broken. But there was nothing. You just have to let it heal itself. Obviously, I had to stop wrestling for a couple of weeks, I think, at least, and just carry on with my work. I couldn't get involved with that, so I had to be careful. But that was the worst injury. Apart from you get the aches and you get like a bruise here and you might hurt your arm or your leg. But the worst was a break, and that was my worst. Yeah.
What is your Mount Rushmore of UK and Irish wrestlers?
Again, could you repeat that one?
What's your Mount Rushmore of UK and Irish wrestlers?
Well, again, I can't really say because I haven't seen many of the Irish wrestlers. I can't really answer. Is that what you're saying? What's the difference between them?
Like what's the once more means what's the top five best? Who's the top five best UK and Irish wrestlers?
Oh, right. Well, for the Irish wrestlers, obviously, I can't. If you're going back to the day, Dave Finlay's got to be up there, isn't he?
100%.
Dave Finlay's got to be the one. There was another guy many, many years ago wrestled as Wrestling Rasputin. His name
Rasputin,
was
yeah,
Johnny Howard. Lovely guy, John.
yeah.
Always had fun with him in the tags. He lived in Manchester. Eventually, he moved back to I think he moved back to Northern Ireland, somewhere near Carrickfergus. I'm not sure, but he moved back, and then I wanted to go and see John, and I was trying to get hold of him, and I knew somebody that said they knew him or knew of him, and they would put a note through the door, and they put a note through his door. And believe it or not, I got a telephone call at work when I was working one night, and it was John, and we had a little chat, and I asked how he was, and he said he wasn't too bad, but he'd had an injury, he'd fallen off a ladder at home.
Oh,
He was on the roof doing something, he fell off a ladder. Anyway, I would have loved to have seen him, but this person who put the note through his door said to me, "He's not very well at all. He's quite poorly." And she said, you wouldn't really recognise him if you go. He'd lost a lot of weight, the hair had gone and everything, and obviously he was quite ill, and he passed away sadly. But he was a lovely guy, that Johnny Howard. Many many years ago, there was a guy called Billy Reed. I never knew what happened to Billy. He was another Irish guy. Tony Stewart was another one, was around when Dave Finlay was around. Again, I don't know what happened to him. Um, Nathan Hoy, like I say, I know, and Steve Savage, I know. And I've actually seen Steve Savage work, and Steve's quite a good combatant, so you've got to put him up there. The top five British wrestlers, well, I mean, again, I go back to James Mason if you're talking current. James Mason, Zack Sabre Jr. was always a good worker. I wrestled with Zack. Doug Williams was always good. Dean Allmark was another one that was always good. And there's Joel Redmond's. He's got a wrestling school and he runs ASW. He's got some good guys there. I've seen obviously Bullet. I know Niwa, good heavy workers, those two. I know Brandon Lee and Nathan Angel. So it's so many to choose from. You can't sort of say one is really, but those guys I've mentioned are always going to be in that list.
and when you say Bullet, are you referring to Bullet Smith?
Again, who?
When you say Bullet, are you referring to Bullet Smith?
I don't know his other name. Bullet is a guy. The wrestling name is Bullet. That's all I can tell you. He's part of Joel Redmond's All Star or ASW. Is it? I don't know what the promotion's called, but Joel Redmond uses a guy called Bullet, big heavyweight in the Reading area somewhere, I believe he lives. But I don't. I think he just wrestles as Bullet. I can't tell you any more than that. But he's really impressive. That guy.
And Bring Back Patty asks, did you ever experience imposter syndrome?
No, I must say I didn't. No. You mean like someone pretending to be a wrestler and they weren't, or something like
I
that?
think Bring Back Patty. Can you say what you mean? I think what he means is imposter syndrome. I mean, like you, you don't feel like you don't feel like you're the right person to be here. Like you don't if you're in a world of sport, say you're in front of
Mm,
Big
yeah.
Daddy, you maybe didn't feel like you should be there.
No, I think it wasn't up to me to put myself on with these guys. The promoter felt if you were competent, they used to match make and they'd put you in with these guys. And obviously, if I had some bad experiences in those tag matches, especially with those, Big Daddy might have said to Max Crabtree, don't put this guy with me. He's not competent to do these matches. So I never had that problem. No, I was lucky to go. You can't say every match is great, but there wasn't an occasion where I got back to the dresser and I thought, oh, that was absolutely terrible. Because in our day we did the match, we did the match, we got the reactions from the crowd. Sometimes they would be quiet because there'd be another match on that was a bit more exciting, but you never got somewhere and thought, oh, that was a dreadful match, especially because I was against this guy and we just don't gel together. That never really happened.
And um, so I met an interview. Dodgy Dave Walker, LDN referee. You're taking over as an LDN referee, aren't you?
I'm not taking Dave's place. I will be honest with that. Dave Walker is the number one referee for Sanjay Bagga and LDN Promotions. And Dave has been with Sanjay a long, long time now. When I decided that would be it for me to wrestle, I've stepped in a few times when Sanjay has contacted me and said, "Can you referee for us?" So I quite like the refereeing aspect of the job because you know the job. I know the guys. I know where to follow them round, and I know how to watch what they're doing. And obviously, Dave lives on the Isle of Wight, so it's not always easy for him to come over to the UK mainland to referee shows. So if Sanjay's stuck, he will contact me from time to time, and I have refereed a few shows for him. And as I say, I hope to do many more for him, if it's possible. But also, he has other referees in different areas because he might be well up north somewhere. He's not going to bring me all the way up there to referee, so he'll use a referee that's local to maybe a venue in the north or the Midlands. And on the Isle of Wight, David would do that, and sometimes on the south coast, if David's over, he would do those. But I like to class myself as part of the refereeing team or the backstage team for LDN now. Yes.
And just when we're talking about LDN, Scenic Spots asked, Sanjay Baga is doing very well promoting LDN. What's he like behind the scenes?
He's a very hard-working man, actually. He's been running LDN since 2004. At first, he was just someone who was going to try and put a couple of shows on, and it grew and grew and grew from there. He's non-stop. He does everything. He goes out. He puts the posters up for his shows. He puts the banners up. He's off backwards and forwards all over the place. He's a good guy. I've always got on with him. Again, you speak as you find, and I find Sanjay to be perfect with me. Never have a problem. He was in Northern Ireland yesterday, believe it or not. He flew out to Ireland yesterday. I believe he did a show yesterday, last night, and then he flew back this morning. So he's back and forward. He's promoting well in Ireland. His shows are doing very well in Ireland. I think that's with help with Nathan Hoy. Nathan helps him there as well. Sanjay has his own ring over there, which saves him taking a ring over all the time in a van. And he also promotes shows. He's done Guernsey a couple of times. He goes all over. He is a touring company, so he's not limited to one area. He will go all over, to be honest. Excuse me. But yeah, he's very, very hard working, that guy. He's probably online 25 hours a day, even though there's only 24 hours in a day. But he's constantly online doing something, as I say, organising his shows, organising the men he needs, make sure the ring's ready, that the ring van's ready, and everything else to do with the show. And he has some big shows, and fair play to him. I mean, he's done well over his 20 plus years of promoting.
And while you were on your retirement tour, I was interviewing Mike Quackham, who's your friend. What was it like at your retirement match?
Which one? The one with Quackenbush?
No, the one recently with LDN.
Yeah. Well, that all came about because Sanjay Bagga, obviously, I never really did one last match for him. And he said to me, "Would you consider doing one last match for LDN?" So I said, "Not really, Sanjay. I'm quite happy with the promotion." He said, "Well, look," he said, "we've got Potter's Bar coming up. It's not far for you. I'll put you on with Alan Lee Travis." And that's what the plan was going to be, to go on with Alan, who, again, I know quite well. So I said, "Well, I don't know, Sanjay." He said, "No, just do this one." So I thought, well, I've done a lot for Sanjay, and I say he's always been fair. So I thought, yes, I'll help him out. So obviously, I hadn't wrestled. The previous time I wrestled was probably in June of this year, when I did a big show for a guy called Pete Bainbridge of Southwest Wrestling. I was on with James Mason there, believe it or not. So I thought, well, I should be okay to do it. So yeah, I went on with Alan, and it was fine. Obviously, it was an ordinary match, and Alan won the match, and it was okay. I didn't feel any after effects of not wrestling because I still train, as I say. So, but again, I proved the point. It's not that I can't do it. It's a case of like, I can do it, but I think that's enough now. I've done everything I wanted to achieve in wrestling. When you think, I mean, not many people carry on wrestling through 6 decades. I mean, I started in the 70s. I wrestled in the 80s, 90s, the noughties, the 10s, the 20s. That's enough. And I'm only a part-time wrestler. If I'd have been full-time, I would have probably finished 30 years ago, I should think. But you can do so much, but you do feel it. And when you get knocks, you take a lot longer to recover from those. And I didn't particularly want to get any sort of like injury. But with Alan Travis, again, it was a wrestling technical match there. Alan's competent at what he does, and I've known him. I know his style. He knows my style, and it was okay. It was nice to just to do that one for Sanjay and say thank you to the fans. thank you to Steve Litton, and all the backstage staff, Dave Walker, Johnny Kincaid was there, a former wrestler from just before my time, and a little bit while I was still wrestling. John was sort of like at the end of his time wrestling. It was good to see him and one or two other guys that were there. So yeah, it was okay. Yeah.
How did you end up at LDN?
Again, I started with LDM because I got a call from Sanjay Bag around about 2005 or 2006, and I'd never heard of him. I never met the guy, but he was running a show at Enfield, and it was a television. It was a pilot for some sort of like cable TV show or something he was hoping to achieve. And I was on with a guy called Magic who lived in the Midlands, and I wrestled that guy there. And then after that, Sanjay gave me another job, and that's how it was. So I've probably over the last few years done more wrestling for LDM promotions than anybody else, apart from the ones here for like an odd one for one company here and there when I was on with James Mason or Quackenbush or something like that. But most of the work, if you look back over the last 2 to 3, maybe 4 years, it's been with LDN.
And Carrick Poole says Alan Lee Travis is awesome. Have you wrestled him many times?
Yeah, believe it or not, I have wrestled Alan quite a few times. And actually, I was in London yesterday meeting my niece who was down for a couple of days. And I met Alan E. Travers in London. We met at Waterloo Station just for a catch up and a Christmas drink before, because I'm not likely to see him again before Christmas now. And he was with some other friends. They were going out to the Winter Wonderland in Hyde Park. And I had a quick catch up with Alan there and had a chat with him. But Alan's always been okay. It's always good to see him. Again, I only really see him at LDN shows. He's had a spell off of LDN recently. He probably had about 3 or 4 weeks where he felt he wasn't able to wrestle properly again. He felt a little bit tired, a little bit jaded, and he felt he wasn't up to doing what he usually does. So he had some time off. But luckily, as I say, he came back and he did that show for me, with me at Potter's Bar, which was good of him because he could have said no, he didn't want to do it. Then I would have had to probably wrestle one of the other guys on the show, which nothing wrong with that. You know, he's got some good guys working for him, but Alan kindly stepped in and he decided he would do that show for me. So yeah, Alan's great.
And obviously, World of Sport was brought back for a while. It failed kind of, and it didn't work out too well. What was your opinion on the newer World of Sport?
Well, I did see again. I'll be honest with you. People talk about, did you see this on WWE or did you see that on that and NXT UK and this and that? And I don't watch any of it. I must be honest. When I did it, it's like when you do anything, when you do a job, you don't really, or in maybe in wrestling, people do watch other matches and things. But when I used to do my job, I did my job and that was it. I didn't really want to watch other things, you know. And yes, they did try to bring it back. It did fail. I don't know. I don't know. The format was never going to be the same. To me, World of Sport and the wrestling was World of Sport and the wrestling in those days. Whatever they try to bring back now and call World of Sport is never going to really be how it was. Again, you've got to have the guys that can do that stuff. And we know that's long gone now, to be honest. And I think, you know, we had a good run. I was always told that I was involved in wrestling when it was good. And the person that told me that was right. I was. And I don't think, you know, I think it's a wrong title to call it World of Sport Wrestling because it's not anymore. You know, that was then and this is now. Another name, something else might go down well. But yeah, it's a shame that these things fail because people do try. You know, I mean, NXT UK, I don't know what's happened with that. You know, James Mason was telling me that he was one of the trainers out there with Johnny Moss and Johnny Saint. They were all out there training up, and we thought, right, they're going to start doing things with this. But that's sort of like come to a bit of a stalemate at the moment, and they don't know whether that's going to carry on, whether it's going to go into Europe, what they're going to do. And obviously, a lot of the British wrestlers were signed and doing things, and then a lot were released. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know if the money's not there anymore, or you know, things are just changing.
And I completely agree with you on what you were saying about World of Sport not being the same. They were doing high flying moves, doing drop kicks off top of the ladders and all. It wasn't World of Sport. Um, what did you think when they were doing that? Did you not think it was just not proper technical wrestling? What
Well, I
preference?
mean, no, you see, that's the thing in World of Sport nowadays. We did something different. You know, we could put a move on, just say put a headlock on. You could hold a headlock or a wrist lock on for like 2 or 3 minutes. And then when you got the escape, you know, that's when the crowd would clap and that. But again, it's a different audience. You've got to remember it's a different audience that are watching wrestling these days. In my day, They would be your parents, your grandparents watching us, things like that, because if you looked at some of those old World of Sport matches and you look at the crowd, not so much the wrestling, look at the crowd. They're all older people, men, women. You didn't see many kids going to wrestling in those days. It wasn't that. It was like a working man's sport, I think. They all had suits on, they had jackets on, ties. The women were all dressed, with their hair done and things like that. And it was that sort of thing. But these days it's completely different. I think the merchandise is all geared up now. Every promotion has their merchandise stalls. It's geared up for the kids. There's music going on. There's entrances. The guys come in. They all take the microphone and they all make the promos. What they do in our day, you didn't do that. They didn't want you to take the microphone. The only person who had the microphone was the master of ceremonies who introduced the wrestlers. There was none of this, coming down to the ring is so and so. They used to just say, first match, please. And the two guys got in. There was no merchandise. It might be like a lucky program number on the back. That was it. And that's how it was in those days. But again, the halls were different. The paying public were probably different. Some promoters these days, I think, rely on the merchandise to pay the guys and things like that. In our day, it was not like that. We knew that joint promotions was a big organisation. They had a lot of wrestlers with them, and you were on fair money, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, drop kicking off the top rope. I mean, as you say, Marty Jones and Mark Rocco started that, and that was something new in those days. And that was early '80s. They were doing that, so they were ahead of their time. So maybe they were the forefront for what we see today.
Yeah, and I think that nowadays people have kind of ruined high flying wrestling. At the time there was only a couple of people doing it and it was awesome, but it's kind of got boring now where everybody's doing it and it just isn't good no more.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think you need to be different. Every match doesn't have to be the same, but it does seem to be that way. There might be a hold put on one or two, and then it does seem to be like fast flow, flowing stuff. Corner to corner, off the corner post, outside, in. It just seems to be one thing after another. It doesn't seem to be anyone to come up for air, if you know what I mean. They just seem to be. But fair play to them, they can do it. I couldn't do it. And I mean, I do admire what they do because it is good. It's good. But again, I think, would you call it wrestling anymore? I don't know. I don't know whether they call it like when the WWE came out and they said, when people asking if what wrestling was really like, if it was, all legit, they came out and said it was sporting entertainment, and didn't do them any harm. The crowds didn't drop away. They still went to see it. I think people now know what it is and they go and they just want to be entertained. And if people go away from these halls and say, yeah, that was a good night, fair enough. The guys have done their job. But those guys, you've got to think, they take so many bumps and bangs these days. And you think, are they still going to be wrestling when they're like 45, 50, like some guys are, and the stuff they do these days, we didn't have to do. So maybe that was good for us. We didn't have to do any of that stuff, but we got away with it. That was our time, and now this is what they expect now.
Yeah, but if you have to take hard bumps and you have to go through tables, it's more better doing it for a reason. These guys are just going through tables for the sake of it, for the sake of the fans. I think you should be doing it for better reasons instead of risking your life for just a hardcore
Yeah,
wrestling.
yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, there are I've heard of promoters that someone was telling me the other night that there was a show and it was all of that. There was these tin tacks all over the ring and people being slammed on them. To me, that I can't see what that's got to do with wrestling, actually. But they say there might be an audience that want to see it, but it's not like a family show, is it, to watch something like that? And again, in our day, you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want blood all over a canvas and things like that. But as I say, no, I don't know. It's a difficult one to approach that. I mean, it's not for me. It's not what I learned when I was wrestling. But again, that was then, and this is now. And if this is how it has to be, then promoters are not going to change it back to the old style while they're used to doing this, and the crowds come to see that. But again, we could build storylines up with our shows. There might be something that goes on, and you would leave them wanting something for next time, and the public would come back and see that. These days, not being funny to the guys, but they are known on certain promotions. But if you took Mr. X here from this promotion and put him onto another promotion, no one would have heard of him because he's only used to being with that sort of promotion. It's very difficult to build anybody up over the whole wrestling world, if you know what I mean. In our day, yes, everyone knew the Marty Jones, they knew the Mark Roccos, they knew the Big Daddies, they knew the Kendo Nagasakis, they know the Dave Finleys, Skull Murphy, Drew McDonald, all these guys. They were known. Television made them names. They were known around the halls. These days, Mr. X is known in sort of like Hemel Hempstead, but he probably isn't known in Manchester. You know, it's just how it is.
Bringing back Paddy asks, do you notice wear and tear on your joints over the shows over the years?
Um, Yes, you do. Obviously, you get aches and pains. Obviously, I tried to look after myself as best as we could. But again, you've got to remember and bring back Paddy. I'll have to remember that we do not take the bumps in my day that these guys take today when they come down. Everyone in our day never used to wear knee pads or elbow pads or anything like that. All these guys now wear elbow pads and knee protectors, things like that. But they take the bumps as well. I mean, sometimes you wonder when they come. We was always taught how to land properly, but these days, some of the stuff they do, I do wonder how they do manage to land properly. And as you say, are they doing it? Are they trying to put a show on, or they're just trying to do it for themselves and think, well, that looks good. And the more you do this stuff, the more. If you don't get the reaction, do you try harder to do a more spectacular bump to get the reaction, or what? Some people, again, you talk to people and they used to say, more is less. That's what we used to say, more is less these days, not less is more. It was always more is less. The more you do, you don't have to. We had good guys. We had a guy called Sid Cooper, Cyanide Sid Cooper. He could he could get a match out of anybody, and Sid could do a match with just pulling faces. He could have a glare at the crowd and things like that. He didn't have to do anything, but that was our reaction. That's how we got reaction. There wasn't any need for sort of like coming backwards off a corner post into the crowd, diving through when they're all standing outside and landing on the front row and all things like that. Didn't need to do it, and thankfully, I'm glad I didn't have to do that. And I know I couldn't do that now anyway. But I don't think anybody my age would want to do that now.
And Scenic Spots asks, Johnny, did you ever get a figure made of you?
No, no, but my wrestling ring jackets were made by somebody, and we got quite a few things. I did a couple of little television spots. I was in a TV series that failed quite badly. Actually, it was called Rumble. It was a series for BBC. It was about wrestling many years ago. I was in one episode of that as a wrestler dressed up, and the star of the show was Leslie Joseph, who was in Birds of a Feather, and Brian Glover, who he wrestled as Leon Harris many years ago. He was in it as a manager, but it didn't get anywhere that. And then we've done a couple of different spots for a television show where we had to do a wrestling scene somewhere. But no, I never had a figure or anything like that made of me, no. Yeah, I get pictures, people who have taken a picture somewhere I haven't seen and they said, would you sign this? And I thought, well, where'd you get that from? And that's obviously it's just a picture, but no figures made at all, no.
So when LDN come over to Northern Ireland, will you be touring with them?
Well, obviously, I think Sanjay, when he comes over there, he has his own team of wrestlers, obviously, and he has a referee that he uses on certain shows. But I did hear that Nathan Hoy did say he'd like me to come back at some time. So, yes, I would like to come back. I saw Nathan in August of this year. He was at the Watford lunch that we had here. It's always good to see Nathan, but again, I'd only see him, I suppose, if I was to go back over there. So I'm likely to come back at some point. Sanjay might use us as a guest referee there at some point. That's what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, Nathan's a great trainer as well. Nathan trains me.
Oh yeah, Nathan's great. I mean, when he was over the first time for the Watford lunch, he brought his wife with him. And it was good to meet her as well because I knew they were married, but I don't think I'd met her for a long, long time. And then this time, I don't think she was with him. But yeah, Nathan, yeah, it's always good to have a word with Nathan. But again, I have been over there and we did do a training school. Early days that was, but I haven't seen him. But yeah, I'm hoping to come back and see him at some point.
Was that in Nathan's promotion or where was it?
It was we went to a gym somewhere. I can't think where it was. And myself and Sanjay Bagger, he took me over there and I wrestled a show there as well. I can't remember. It was a little while ago. Nathan would probably know, but we did a little training school there as well, and it would have been in. It looked like it was in a lockup somewhere on a trading on an industrial estate.
Was it called the Lion's Den?
You've got me there, Keaton. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Because that's where Nathan does his training.
Possibly, it could have been something like that. I remember going there with Sanjay, and then Sanjay had to go off somewhere, so I stayed with Nathan and a couple of the guys. But again, we're talking pre-COVID at least, so you know.
Ken Nakasaki obviously recently retired at his retirement match. What did you think of
Mhm.
that match?
Again, I went to see it. I was not involved at all with the show. I went there just to see the boys and see what was going on. I saw the match. Obviously, Kendo, for 83 years old, it was amazing to get in the ring and do anything like that. He didn't go off his feet, obviously. He did deliver a couple of throws and he hit Sanjay with a kendo stick twice in the stomach and once on the back of the head, which I think the crowd wanted to see anyway. Um, and he was a very big star. So I think he proved to himself that he could get back in there and do something. But actually locking up with somebody and getting on the floor, I don't think that would be him now. But he did fair enough. And I say that the show, it was well received by the crowd there that saw the show. That's all I can say because I did see the match, but it was fine. They got away and it was fine.
Wrestling Insider asked, "What's the biggest crowd you've wrestled in front of?"
I can tell you that it was in Aberdeen in 1990, I think it was, when I did those two matches with Big Daddy. It was at the Aberdeen, I think it was the Beach Ballroom at Aberdeen. We did a Friday night and a Saturday night, the same venue, night after night for Scottish television. It was recorded and it was shown only on Scottish television and Grampian TV. There was 1,100 in on the first night and 1,200 on the second night. And that's the biggest crowd I ever wrestled in front of.
Craig Poulos, the grandfather of Irish wrestling, was awarded an NAB this year. Did you ever meet Dave Finlay Senior?
No, I didn't. I would have liked to have done, but I did see a little YouTube clip where Dave Finlay Sr. was with Johnny Howard, wrestling Rasputin, and they were showing each other how they used to work in the day and
Yeah,
put the
I
moves
seen that
on.
as
And
well.
yeah, that was very interesting because that's how I knew Johnny Howard. I've known of Dave Finlay Sr., but I've only met Dave Finlay himself, and I've never met Dave's son either. So it's only Dave Finlay, the original, well, for me, the Belfast Bruiser. Dave Finlay is the guy I met. But I did see that little clip, and that was interesting. And it was good to see Johnny Howard looking so well in that video at that time. Yeah.
Giant Haystacks made a short run in WCW in American wrestling. What did the guys backstage, the British wrestlers, think of that? That he was going to America?
Well, obviously Haystacks worked here quite a bit. He did all those big matches with Shirley, Big Daddy, and then obviously he was going over. I didn't know if I knew at the time he was going to be over there. I think we only saw him when he came back. But obviously, you know the story that he wasn't well at the time. He was suffering, before he went over there. I think they had big hopes for him because he was a big man and to go on with Hogan and people like that. I just saw a couple of the matches where he went in and squashed a few people. Um, and then he came back. So it was sad for him, because it wasn't a good time for him, I don't think, to go over there. And obviously, he wasn't well enough to stay there. So we're glad that he decided to come back. But there you are. That's life, isn't it? These things happen. But he was always a good guy, Haystacks. It was lovely. He was so quietly spoken outside of the ring. We saw him in the ring. He was a different man. Rampaging and shouting and all that. But backstage in the dressing room, he was very, very he was quite aware and of his size and everything like that. He was quite shy in some ways. If you went anywhere with him and he wanted to stop at a garage or anything like that, he was always a bit wary of getting out the car because people would obviously nudge each other and say, "Look at the size of this guy." So he was always conscious of his size. And he used to tell us that if he ever went anywhere in Manchester where he lived, he would like to get there at 9 o'clock in the morning when the shops opened so that no one would see him. He'd pull outside on double yellow lines, go in the shop. He told us he took a watch in once to be repaired. And he pulled up outside in Manchester, the centre of Manchester, on double yellow lines, 9 o'clock, he opened the car door, he rushed in so that no one would see him, and he said, "Blow me," he said, "somebody recognised me," shouted, "Hello, Martin, hello." And he was so embarrassed. He got in the car and he just had to drive off. He was very conscious of his weight outside of wrestling, but when he was in the wrestling crowd and fraternity of the wrestlers, he was fine.
Did you ever get noticed like that? With fans if you were going anywhere?
Did he ever?
Did you ever get noticed like that if you were going anywhere
No.
with?
No,
No.
I never travelled with Haystacks at all. I think maybe once in the van when we went up to Scotland. I think he was in the. No, he wasn't in the van. Sorry, Danny Collins drove him up there. So I probably travelled with him only once because he was Manchester based, and I didn't ever have to travel with him. I saw him on shows, but no, I was fine with everything like
TZS videos asked,
that.
what was that Phil Powers? Was that Phil Powers commentating on your retirement match?
Yes, apparently it was. Actually, Phil Powers, I don't think he was there on the night. I'm pretty certain no. Phil was not there on the night, and I think that commentary was put on after. I think the video was shown to him and he put the commentary on after. So he was definitely not there on the night, I can tell you that.
Uh, Bring Back Paddy asked, Johnny, do you like football? If so, what's your favourite team?
I watch it. I must say, I wouldn't go out my way to watch it, but like when Match of the Day is on, I record it and I watch it. I don't really follow it as such, obviously. I do watch certain games. That's all I can tell you. But I don't have what you'd call living in Luton here. You would think it'd be Luton, but last year they did quite well when they were in the Premiership. They weren't expected to stay there, and they didn't. They were relegated, but they gave it their best shot. And this year they're not doing well at all back in the Championship, which is a bit disappointing because I think that people expected them to be there or thereabouts, challenging up there to try and get back, but it's not going to happen this year. And they had a couple of good players that obviously have been sold on. They had a guy called Ross Barkley who they took on, and then they've sold him on for 5 million. Now they sold him back to Aston Villa, which he had every right to go back into the Premiership and hopefully maybe secure an England spot again. He was a good player for Luton. They did well with him. They seemed to play better when he was around. He controlled it a lot better. They seem to be lost now, without him. They just don't seem to have the players to compete properly in this division at the moment. But it's a shame, but that's how it is. But yes, I do watch football occasionally. But maybe the matches I would watch would be the World Cup and the Euro Championships. I'd watch those. I like to see what happens in that. But I'm not an over the top big football fan, but I will watch it. Yeah.
Who do you think? I obviously understand that one of your favourite matches was against Mick McManus. It was a very memorable match. But who do you think is the best wrestler that you've ever worked with?
Oof, dear, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Um, Well, there's quite a few spring to mind. The best when you say the best match that you've ever worked with, it has to take two of you to make the match. So I could say that you could be the best wrestler I worked with. If I was no good in the match, it'd be dreadful, wouldn't it? So it always needs both of you, both the opponents, myself and whoever I'm on with, to make the match good. And you do that between yourselves. So there's never really one about a best match. I've had a lot of good matches because we've both clicked, if you know what I mean. A lot of them with the Rock and Roll Express, obviously, wrestled him more than anyone else, I should think. Um, the matches with Steve Gray were always good, Johnny's saying, because they were so easy to go through. There was nothing complicated with it. There was nothing, I knew John's moves, he knew mine. I know Steve Gray's moves, Mel Sanders' moves, things like that. And it's between you. You always have a good match. I can't say I've had a bad match with those guys. James Mason again, Doug Williams, Robbie Brookside, even. So I can't really pick one out. I can't really answer that one for you because I might say to you one day, like Steve Gray was the best match I ever had, but that might have been that time because everything clicked. Another time it might have been a little bit off, and it was still a good match, but it was not the best match. So it's difficult to answer that one.
If you could go back in time and have a match with anyone, who would it be with?
But there was three guys that I would have liked to wrestle, and I never got the chance to. Maybe four, I suppose. One of them would have been Steve Logan, the original Iron Man from Brixton. He virtually retired in my second year of pro wrestling. I met him 2 or 3 times, never wrestled him. But in those days, they used to try and match you weight for weight, if you know. Now, Steve was always a mid heavyweight or a light heavyweight, and I was just a middleweight. Although it did happen because Mal Sanders was my weight and he was on with Logan quite a lot. I never wrestled Steve. I'd like to have done because to me he was the original, top one of the top villains. The other one would have been the British world and European mid heavyweight champion Mike Marino. Again, Mike was 14 stone 13 above my weight. I tagged with Mike Marino, but I never actually wrestled against him. And again, it probably would have never happened. He was always on with heavy guys, Mike. He was always on with the real heavyweights, the big daddies, the giant haystacks, the Bruno Ellingtons, the Prince Kamalis, Johnny Yearsley, Vidor, Pete Roberts. She was always on with the heavy guys, Tibor Zakash, people like that. So I never got that. Johnny Kincaid, I'd love to wrestle. I mean, Johnny Kincaid, to me, when he was part of the Caribbean Sunshine Boys, fantastic. The heat they got, I never saw heat like that in my life. When I was a puncher, I went to the Royal Albert Hall. Johnny Kincaid and Dave Bond were on against Johnny Wilson and Roy Sinclair, and the heat was unbelievable. And it was at the time when they were creating a lot of trouble, shall we say. And in the end, they got so big, the promoters had to split them up and disband the Caribbean Sunshine Boys because of the trouble it caused around the halls. All the racial problems we had, and the National Front was around at the time, and it was very difficult. They were very good workers, those two, Kincaid and Bond, and unfortunately they only did one television, and the promoters decided that was enough because if it got too aggressive and too controversial, they could have lost the television, so they had to split them up. So Kincaid would have been one guy I'd like to have gone on. Again, another heavyweight, so it was never going to happen. So those were three that I can mention to you that I would have liked to have gone on and I never did.
And how did you become in a tag team with Big Daddy?
I think I just turned up at a show one day, and as you did, you never knew who you was going on with. But in those days, there was posters outside the halls. So I got to Cheltenham Town Hall in I think it was about 1979 or probably a very early 80. And there was a poster outside on the wall, and it was myself and Big Daddy, and it was against Ian Bully Boy Muir and Mal King Kong Kirk, and that was at Cheltenham. So that was my very first Big Daddy tag match, and then after that, you found yourself, you could be in them every so often. If Daddy was on, it was down south somewhere, my area especially, Hemel Hempstead, London shows, or even here Dunstable or St Albans, places like that. There's always a chance, or Hertford, it would be me and Big Daddy. Not always, but I did my fair share of those, yeah.
TZ in his video says, Johnny, I remember seeing Big Daddy holding two guys in a headlock and you giving them a double drop kick. You were ace.
Yeah, that might have been actually. I think that might be on that Scottish TV because that one is on YouTube. You might have seen that. And that was the one at Aberdeen, like I told you at the start. We used to come to the centre of the ring. The referee would tell you whatever. I'd turn my back. One of them would hit me. Daddy would grab them too. He'd hold them in a headlock either side, and I would drop kick the two of them. A bit of a difficult move at the time because instead of drop kicking 2 feet together, hitting somebody, you had to open your legs and try and catch them like that. So it was like you're landing funny as well, but it worked, and we did that a few times. Yes, that's probably one of those. I know that's one of those matches on Scottish TV that we did for Scottish TV, which is on YouTube. Yeah.
And after World of Sport stopped, it seemed like British wrestling kind of died.
Well, for a start, obviously all those guys that were on World of Sport were not going to be shown on television anymore. It was the new band that came up. So they had to think of something to do, and they had to probably think, well, what are we going to do without the television? Because hall shows, it's like anything. We could have a good show here in my front room today, but you'd never see it because it wouldn't be on television. It's only the people here that would see it. So, yeah, I don't know. It died probably in the early 90s. It went downhill a bit, but then it revived again because with everything that people getting new ideas and try to probably do a bit more like the American stuff, try to introduce those sort of like razzmatazz things, with music and coming into the ring and all the promos the guys used to do, getting the microphone, telling the crowd that they're all awful and they've never seen a lot of people and things like that in this place before. We say we didn't do that. We never took. You weren't allowed to take the microphone. There might be one or two guys that did it, but it was always told beforehand that they could do it, you know. But in our day, the MC did the introductions. There was no speaking, anything like that. And it wasn't needed in those days. So yes, it did go down, but it got a resurgence. And at the moment, I think it's pretty good. I mean, I know Sanjay's doing well. I know Rumble Promotions, Steve Barker's promotion is doing well. You know, and different promotions that I probably don't know of up and down the country. Another one is Brad Flash's promotion, Mega Slam. They're doing well. You
Excellent.
know, so yeah, they're doing very well. Brad's done well for himself with his shows up and down the country. So fair play to them. There's probably promotion. I mean, Joel Redman, he does well when he puts his little shows on down there in Salisbury. So fair play to these guys. They're trying. They're doing what they can do, and while there's still audiences watching it, it's good for the business.
And as you say there, as you said, companies like LDN are doing quite well. ICW also are growing from Scotland, and
Hmm.
World of Sport was brought back on a field run. But WWE now are coming to UK and a lot of shows like Money in the Bank, Clash at the Castle. They're doing that yearly. They're also doing house shows, Smackdowns, Raws, and stuff. So I can see British wrestling's kind of on up right now, and it seems like we're going into a new golden era. What do you think this is? Why do you think this is?
Well, I don't know really. As I say, there's probably more wrestlers coming into it. The boys are probably working a lot harder as well, trying to make names for themselves, obviously. I don't know about full time. When we used to talk about full time wrestlers, in my day, if someone said to you they were a full time wrestler, that meant they were working 6 nights a week. Now, some of the guys I speak to today, one or two say, well, I'm full time. I don't have a job. I'm a full time wrestler. But they might only be working twice a week. To me, that's not a full time wrestler. What do they do on those other days? They're not working. You have to be out every night. Now, there's enough promotions now to work people, I would think, 7 nights a week. But there's so many promotions. It's flooded with promotions. It's flooded with wrestlers, and they're not going to be able to do that. You know, certain wrestlers will only wrestle for maybe this company, and they're not asked to wrestle for other companies. Some of the boys are obviously, but I don't know. I think you know it's been around for years and years. Wrestling, you know, in Roman times it all started, didn't it? And you know, it's good. It's good for these lads now because, as I say, I was lucky. I was very lucky. You know, some people found it very hard to get into wrestling. In our day, it was hard. These days, they seem there's training schools everywhere that they go to. There was none of that in my day. You couldn't, you know, they didn't want you to go to it. You know, come into the professional wrestling ranks, as so to speak, like joint promotions. They were worried that you were going to come in and what you're going to say and what you're going to tell people about wrestling. You know, these days, you know, you find that they go to a training school and they're in. You know, but it wasn't like that. They tried to. They would really give you a hard time. Some of these guys. I was lucky. I was very lucky, but I've known people that really got put through it when they wanted to be a wrestler.
And
Um,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say it was very, very difficult in those days to get in. I was lucky, and I say these days they seem to do it. But like I said to you, they do so much. These guys, you know, they do a lot of moves. They do a lot of high flying stuff. They all seem to be doing it. There doesn't seem many that don't do the high flying stuff, you know, or try to do that. They all seem to do that sort of stuff. But as you say, when you get older, you know, are you still going to be able to do that stuff? Maybe they're making the most of it now, thinking, well, another 5 years, that'll be me done. Well, who knows?
And I'm an aspiring wrestler in training. I train with Nathan and at the Lions Den in IPW. What advice could you give me?
Well, like I said to you earlier on about, you know, asking people when they are training, depends what Nathan shows. You know, the first thing is obviously, you know, how to get into the ring, how to use the ring correctly, to use all of the ring, how to lock up, not rush these moves. Don't try something you've seen him do and think you can do it, you know, unless you are competent at doing that. Um, it's the basic stuff, you know. A lot of people, it's like anything, you know. A lot of people in wrestling, they seem to want to be able to run before they can even walk. You know, yeah, this guy might be able to fly off the top rope and come backwards off a somersault on the floor and moonsault somebody from the top, or brainbuster somebody, or DDT somebody, but they can't put a hold on, they can't lock up, can't put a correct headlock on, you know, things like that. But again, maybe they think that's not needed. But I still think you need some basics in sport. It's like in all sport. There's rules and regulations for all sport. Golf, football, tennis. You've got to know how to hold yourself properly. You've got to know how to land properly for a start. And if people are throwing you all over the place, I wonder how many times these guys do manage to land properly without feeling a twinge or in our day, yeah, we used to land okay, but there was nothing that we did that these guys are doing today. We didn't do anything like that. But then again, like I said, we didn't need to, did we?
And what's next for Johnny Kidd?
Well, as I say, I still train. I travel a lot, not necessarily for wrestling. I've got friends that live in Germany and France. I've got friends in Sweden. I go and visit them as well. I'll always go to the shows, mainly LDM, because I say Sanjay doesn't live that far from me here. He has a lot of shows. He's a touring company, so he could be just down the road at one point or up the road somewhere. And I'm always in contact with them and the guys that work for them. Um, yeah, the training stuff I do, and just basically, I've done my time in wrestling. As I say, I sort of like those ones with Quackenbush. That was going to be my last match there, and then someone else asked me to do one. Can you do one here? Could you do this? Could you do that? And I did them. But I think now is the time. I was 22 when I started. I'm 69 now, so I had my last match at 69. It's an age, isn't it? Yeah, I don't mind saying that because I did. But then Kendo Nagasaki's just come out and done one at 83. So, but then again, I actually did get in the ring and roll about and do the matches and do that. Kendo just was a part of a three-a-side tag match. But fair play to him. He's got all those years on me, hasn't he? He's got 14 years older than me. And maybe when I'm 83, I wouldn't even be able to stand up in the ring. Who knows? So, no, I think I've enjoyed my time in wrestling, as I say, and it was always good for me. I did what I wanted. I never was without a job. I carried on my job for 40 years. I took the retirement after 40 years with the job, and I think doing something like wrestling for me was an escapism from a normal job. Instead of just going to work, getting up in the morning, going to work, coming home, seeing the wrestling guys, and it was an escapism from a normal 9 to 5 job. So that's why I like doing it.
And as we're coming to the end of the show, Johnny, I just want to thank you for taking the time to answer my questions.
No, I thank you, Keaton, for asking me on the show. I know we planned it a long time ago and we couldn't get one
Yeah.
date lined up, but we have got one now. And I'd just like to say that anybody out there that's listening, that's thinking of starting wrestling, yes, by all means, learn properly, go to the clubs. If you're in Ireland and you know Nathan, I'm sure Nathan's always willing to take people on over there. And just be careful with what you do, you boys. And anybody in wrestling now, just enjoy what you're doing and carry on the good work.
So thanks very much for coming on, Johnny.
Thank you, Keaton. All
Thank
the
you.
best to you and
All the
everyone who's
best.
listening and watching. Thank you now, and good night.
Uh, so as for Johnny Kidd, that was such a good interview. A great wrestling legend coming on the show, very friendly guy. As for the next Kayfabe with Keaton, we'll have coming on the Stars of Land here from Titanic Wrestling, who've been doing very well for themselves as as actors, and it'll be great to have these guys on, the three team here from Titanic Wrestling. But as for this show, being a great show, a lot of people commenting in. We've seen people or regulars commenting in, but I want to thank the people who are new coming in. Hopefully, we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.